Dear participants, good afternoon from Incheon. We are now about to start the sub-regional session of the launch of the Asia and the Pacific SDG Progress Report 2022. My name is Fidelis Sadikon, Sustainable Development Officer of ESCAP's East and Northeast Asia Office, and I will moderate our sub-regional session this afternoon. We are delighted to have a very broad-based participation in this session looking at our registered list. And so it really demonstrates the multi-stakeholder dimension of our 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Our 20-minute session will start off with a presentation on the subregional highlights of the report, followed by a Q&A session. At this point, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ganbold Baasanjav, Head of ESCAP's East and Northeast Asia Office for the presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, thank you for joining us today for the East and Northeast Asia sub-regional segment of the launch of the SDG Progress Report for 2022, ESCAP's flagship publication. The plenary session many of us joined earlier provided a broader context on how Asia-Pacific countries are progressing in achieving the 2030 agenda targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we focus our lens into our East and Northeast Asia subregion. We know that each subregion in the Asia-Pacific are different circumstances. And as the message of the SDG Progress Report highlight, there is a diverse progress across subregions. For East and Northeast Asia, the subregion is well placed in terms of achievements on a couple of SDG targets as of 2021. First is on the fight against poverty goal 1. The subregion is well ahead of schedule in reducing poverty in terms of both the share of population living below national and international poverty lines. Achievements in poverty eradication have been highlighted by countries in the subregion, including China, in their most recent voluntary national review. Second is on promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization and innovation, as well as building resilient infrastructure, goal 9. The subregion is a strong manufacturing base and well-connected infrastructure have facilitated progress in this regard. While by themselves significant achievements, we cannot be complacent. As the illustration shows, the subregion has yet to see significant progress in achieving the 15 other SDG targets. There are even targets where progress is stagnant, and at worst, we have regressed, moving in the wrong direction. Let us delve deeper into the next slide. This chart shows the subregional snapshot of the SDG progress across the 17 goals as of 2021, with 2015 as the base year. It clearly shows the achievements in Goal 1 and Goal 9, which I just mentioned. Allow me further highlight 3 interlinked points. First, on Goal 8, progress towards decent work and economic growth has been stagnant. As such, as far off from where it should be in 2021. This despite the subregion being home to high-income economies. Delving deeper into the indicators under Goal 8 reveal that the impact of economic growth to generate employment has been insufficient. In addition, there has been an inefficient use of resource in producing output growth. This resource inefficiency reinforces the second point, with the subregion regressing on Goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. And third, growth at the expense of environment degradation is still a persistent challenge in the subregion. This is shown in the poorest performance among all 17 targets on climate action, goal 13, where East and Northeast Asia has regressed the most. Informed of the progress thus far in 2021, going forward, we set our sight to 2030. This slide illustrates progress in the subregion expected by 2030. Each of 17 time-bound and measurable goals comprise of indicators as shown in this slide. The traffic light representation of indicators aims to carry the message of which areas we need to further accelerate progress to achieve the 2030 target, and more importantly, to highlight the urgency to reverse trend. It is in this light as well that we can be informed of the opportunities for both synergies and collective actions that could significantly impact SDG progress in the subregion. For instance, there are interlinkages for joint actions addressing material resource inefficiency under Goal 8 and unsustainable use of natural resources under Goal 12. Also on Goal 13, where the subregion has regressed the most, there is urgency for collective actions on climate change policies. To this end, we welcome the commitment of many countries in our subregion to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, 2060, or targeted reductions commitments by 2030. However, there are still missing pieces where we cannot measure progress in many indicators, as shown in gray color in this slide. Each subregion, East and Northeast Asia included, must continue to work together to increase data availability to track SDG progress and, in process, support evidence-based policy making. In recent years, we have seen the launch of monitoring satellites to significantly improve climate monitoring. However, as the previous slide showed, East and Northeast Asia needs to strengthen its statistics on social indicators to measure quality education, gender equality, and reduced inequalities, to name a few. The analysis of the 2022 edition of the SDG Progress Report informs us of where we stand in terms of achieving the 2030 SDG targets. With more information, I hope that it further reinforces the momentum, compelling us for closer collaboration to act now in this decade of action. Let me now conclude my presentation and thank you, and I'll be happy to take on questions you would address. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganbold. Yes, as highlighted in the presentation, there is wide disparities in the SDG progress across the subregions in the Asia-Pacific region. While East and Northeast Asia has progressed well in some SDG targets, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Also, perhaps taking the subregional snapshot and even narrowing the focus at the country level, intra-country disparities might even be more acute. Hence, localizing SDGs at the subnational levels is one of the key action of many national governments in progressing the implementation of SDG at the national level. Now, at this point, we would proceed with our Q&A session. Please feel free to write your questions on the chat box. We have already received some questions through our registration, so perhaps I would start off from there. And I would be, us here in ESCAP, Ganbold be included, as well as other ESCAP colleagues who have joined us in this session would be happy to address your questions to the extent possible. So the first question, what are the ways in which countries can have access to additional funding support? So perhaps if I may request Ganbold.
Yeah, thank you, Fee. In accelerating progress to achieve the SDG targets, financing is a significant element of the conversation. And it is a persistent challenge, more so now with the COVID-19 pandemic, when resources are more constrained. In this context, the need for additional funding is an important task. Beyond the capacity of the public sector, in terms of the circumstances of its financial position, the role of the private sector is crucial, as it's been mentioned during the plenary session. For instance, developing the local capital market can attract more institutional investors. An enabling environment to attract private investor through public-private partnerships is also important. For countries that do not have sufficient domestic financial resources, the role of international financial resources is key. In this context, development cooperation is crucial. And this is an important shared work here in our subregion in Northeast Asia, which is home to major donor economies. Reshaping the function of development cooperation to also support the achievement of the 2030 Agenda has been the direction taken by donor countries in our subregion.
Thank you, Gumbot. And perhaps just to add certain context as well, further context on that, in terms of the cost of the envelope, for instance, in the 2019 edition of the Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific, another ESCAP flagship publication, ESCAP estimated that an additional $196 billion per year is needed to achieve sustainable infrastructure. So really financing is an issue. We have one question from the in our chat box, and perhaps if we have colleagues from our statistics division who has joined us, they could also further elaborate on the details. Why are there so many aspects of the SDGs that cannot be measured? Perhaps, as highlighted in the plenary session, SDG tracking or monitoring is really based on national data. So in this case, while synthesizing and consolidating data are done at the international level, still in terms of the capacities of many, especially many developing countries in providing data in order for the indicators to be measured for each of the 17 SDG targets are still quite constrained. So in this case, our statistics, ESCAP, as well as several UN agencies have really done a lot and are still doing a lot in order to improve the national statistics system so that our SDG tracking is well advanced for us to really have a better picture of the SDG targets. So as achievement of the SDG targets. So we hope, Ms. Nang, Mi Kam Nang, we were able to address your question. We have another question which we received from the registration. So before we, if there, we will wait for other questions from the chat box. This question is on policy coherence. How is policy coherence for sustainable development implemented in other countries? Over to you, Ganbold, please.
Yeah, thank you. Sustainable development is a single and universal agenda with its three dimensions, economic, social, and environmental. It is cross-sectorial by nature, and the 2030 agenda needs to be achieved in a balanced and integrated manner. Countries, including in the subregion, have recognized that policy coherence is key. To this end, countries have pursued the whole of government, whole of society approach to achieve the SDG targets. This has been highlighted in countries' voluntary national reviews. As many of us are familiar, these are voluntary national reviews is a country-led, country-driven review of progress in achieving 2030 agenda done at the national and subnational levels. In 2021, several countries in the subregion have conducted VNRs, including China, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Japan. Republic of Korea has conducted its voluntary national review in 2016, and Mongolia will present their second VNR in 2023, having conducted its first one in 2019. To pursue policy coherence, institutional support is essential. For instance, here in the subregion, governments have dedicated government units to ensure policy coherence in relation to sustainable development.
Thank you, Ganbold. Yes, and in fact, if we are to link it to the SDG Progress Report, if you notice in the sub-regional snapshot presented by Ganbold earlier in one of the slides, we are also doing well. The sub-region is also doing well in the SDG 7 Partnership for Goals. So in a way, to a certain extent, the partnerships of whole of government, whole of society has also manifested in terms of advancing our progress to achieve one of the targets, that is SDG Goal 17. Any more questions from the floor? We have at least a minute or so before we wrap up our 20-minute sub-regional session. If I also from other colleagues in ESCAP who has joined us in this session, if they would like to further elaborate on the highlights for the sub-region of the progress report. I see none. So in terms of the raised hands or questions on the chat box. So on this note, we will end our Q&A session, and please do visit the ESCAP website for the result as well as materials presented in the launch today. We will also get in touch for post-event follow-up actions, including the evaluation, so we look forward receiving your feedback. And now I would like to give the floor to Ganbold.
Thank you, colleagues, the participants, once again. I would like to thank you for your active engagement on this launch of the SDG Progress Report 2022. The subregional launch of the Asia Pacific SDG Progress Report is but the first of many activities we have in the subregion for the year. We look forward to seeing you in our next event. So meantime, we'll be happy to remain connected and stay in touch. Thank you very much and have a good day.